Welcome back. My name is Homai. In the last video, we talked about part writing errors, introduced parallel fifths and octaves and unisons, unequal fifths, and we talked about hidden fifths and octaves, consecutive contrary fifths and octaves. So now we're going to actually apply this in some of our assignments here. So let's take a look at this example. So in this case, we're instructed to mark all instances of parallel, contrary, unequal, direct octaves, and fifths. Okay? So I'm going to walk you through how to do this because it can be a little overwhelming at first. You look at it and say, man, I got 4 voices. I got to sit here and analyze all the voice pairs and figure out what's happening. How in the world do I do this without taking an hour, right? So let's talk about strategies on how to approach this. So the keys are in the names. Okay? So understand, direct octaves and fifths only exist on the outer voices, moving in similar motion, okay? So you can actually pretty quickly go through the whole example and find the instances where bass and soprano move in the same direction and resolve to a perfect fifth or an octave. You see what I'm saying? So instead of sitting and reading every single note, you can just kind of hunt it down like a little puzzle. So let's do this right now. Let's hunt down our direct fifths and octaves. I'll use pink for this here, okay? So I'm just looking, okay, and I'm going to do this. Let me use my laser pointer. Soprano ascends, bass descends. Contrary motion. Nope, that's not going to be direct. All right, contrary in the next one. Nope. Oblique. Nope. Okay, here's a situation, but they're moving by the same direction, okay? So that's parallel. I'm going to mark that parallel motion in red here because that might be another error that we might check out, but it's not a similar motion. Okay, next one. Descends by a second, ascends by a second, that's contrary. You're safe. Descends, stays the same. Oblique, we're safe. Okay, here's similar motion, but the soprano is rising by a step. It's not actually leaping. So guess what? We're safe because it's not leaping. All right, next example. Static or stationary motion, we're safe. Next example. Contrary motion, we're safe. So in this example here, we're good to go. We're good to go. Okay, because we didn't have any instances of similar motion. Now we could be really nitpicky and we could say, well, what about this here? The soprano's leaping down a third, the bass stays the same. But in this case, okay, I think we're perfectly fine because we are in oblique motion. So I personally would not consider that offensive. All right, so no instances of direct octaves and fifths to worry about because nothing like that's happening. Now, next what we're going to do is we're going to look for all the parallel motions. I'll mark these with red, okay? Parallel motions. Parallel motions pretty easy to see. What you're looking at the voices and looking for the ones that are moving in the same direction by the same interval, okay? So if we take a look here, okay, that's oblique motion, right? And again, we don't even need to think about the alto here, right? Because the alto stays the same, it's oblique, so we're not thinking about it. Any note that stays the same, for example, soprano staying the same here. We can mark all these. In fact, what I'll do to make this a little easier is let me mark them here. I'll mark it with blue. So that's static motion, and I'm just looking for any instance of static motion in the top 2 voices. Static motion, static, static. If I go to the bottom 2 voices, let's see here, we have static, and then we have static and static. So everything that I marked in blue there are instances where the voices stayed the same. Okay, I can't apparently draw a straight line. That's better. All right. And static motion means we're either going to have static motion between 2 voices or oblique motion, both of which are going to be safe. Okay, so let's take a look. Because when you're taking a look at the parallel motion or contrary motion, you're really looking in between the chords, not really just individually on each chord. So let's go back to our parallel motion hunt, right? So the soprano was ascending. I'll use my laser pointing, ascending. And the bottom 2 voices are descending. Okay, so we're safe. No parallel motion. Okay, the next instance here, if I look at the bass and tenor, I've got some parallel motion here. I'll go ahead and mark this parallel motion. I also have parallel motion here in my soprano and alto. They're descending by a second. Okay, now I'm going to assess these. This is a sixth, so these are parallel six. Parallel six are good. I'm going to erase that. Let's see what the bass and tenor do. Oh, here is a problem. We have parallel fifths. There's a problem. So I've marked that. Continuing our hunt. Okay, so next part here, we're looking for parallel motion. We do have parallel motion between the tenor and the alto. They're both ascending by a step. But what interval is that? That's a sixth. Six are good. So that's fine. Going on. What parallel motion do we have? Oh, wait a second. We have parallel motion between the soprano and the alto, okay, as well as the soprano and the bass. So there's two instances here. Oh, this is a parallel fifth. That's a problem between the alto and soprano. And we also have parallel fifth between the soprano and the bass, and parallel octaves between the alto and the bass. So this is multiple instances of parallel fifths and octaves, because the alto and the bass are actually in unison, G to F there, or G to F sharp. Okay. Now, when we have this instance, we need to ask the questions: are they offensive? Are they offensive? Okay. So in this case, we have an F sharp and an F sharp. Well, C to F sharp is a diminished fifth, right? So diminished fifths are okay. So guess what? The parallel fifth is good to go. So the parallel fifth is not an issue because of the diminished fifth. But we do have an issue with the parallel octaves still between the alto and the bass. And this technically is the unequal fifths example here. But these are good unequal fifths. Continue our hunt. Okay, if we look at the next one, if we can see that soprano goes from C to B, tenor also goes from C to B. Guess what? That's parallel octaves. That's a problem. Continuing forward, because the lower three voices here are all static, that means we're safe because only the soprano moves, no parallel motion. The next example here, okay, we've got, let's see, soprano going up by step, alto going by a third, tenor going by a third. Okay, there is parallel motion right there. Okay, because the alto goes by a third, tenor goes by a third. What are the notes? D and B is a third. So parallel thirds are good, so that's good to go. Next example, three voices are static, which means you can have no parallel motion. And in the last example, we have parallel thirds, soprano and alto, which is good. And the other two voices move in contrary motion. So that's all our examples of parallelism here. Now the only thing left is contrary motion. I'll do this in green. Contrary motion. Okay, contrary motion is pretty simple. You're looking for any instances where the voices go in contrary motion. But guess what? This only matters when you're dealing with fifths, unisons, or octaves. That's it. So we're looking for any fifths. All right, I'm going to mark these here. I've got a perfect fifth right there. And I also have a perfect fifth right here between the soprano and the bass. And then I also have a perfect octave between my tenor, my alto, and the bass. Excuse me. So now my question is this: on the next chord, are any of those still perfect fifths or perfect octaves? Okay. So I'm going to check here. Well, my alto is stationary, so guess what? I can erase any pairing with the alto voice because it's stationary, right? So the only thing that matters now is the soprano and the bass. Soprano goes to E, okay? The bass goes to C. Guess what? That's not an octave. That's not a fifth, so that's fine. Let's continue. We already marked this as a fifth. It was parallel, so that's not an issue anymore. We also have a fifth, though, between the bass and the alto. That's a fifth, C to G. Let's look at the next chord. C to F sharp is a third, so that's fine. Next example here. I've got a perfect fifth between my bass and tenor voices. And that's my only fifth I have, okay? Or octave. I mean, I can, you can take the time to scan it. I know I'm going a bit fast in that regard. but these are the steps nonetheless. Okay, we look at the bass and tenor on the next chord to see if it's also a fifth. Guess what? It's not. It's a third. G to B is a third. That's fine. All right, next one. We know that this isn't parallel octaves. We've already marked that as an error, so we don't have to worry about that. But we also have the fifth here. We've already discounted that since it's unequal fifths. Okay, so now we're fine there. Let's take a look at the next chord now. Okay, I can see that I have an octave, a perfect octave between my bass and alto voices here, the F sharps. Okay, if I'm looking elsewhere, I also have a fifth technically. This is a diminished fifth between my bass and tenor. I also have a diminished fifth between my bass and alto. I mean, not my bass and alto, but I mean the alto and the soprano is also a diminished fifth as well. So if either of those goes to a perfect fifth, we know that that's going to be a problem. So going forward, we look at the next chord, compare the bass to the alto. Bass to the alto is a perfect fifth. This is a perfect fifth here. So we're going from an octave to a perfect fifth. Maybe not the most preferable writing, but that's perfectly fine. Okay? Because you don't have two octaves consecutive, it's changing. So there's still some semblance of independence. So no problem there. We check the bass in the tenor, goes to G and B, that's a third. Well, that's fine. And lastly, we check the F sharp to the soprano. That's not even parallel motion, it's not contrary, similar, so guess what? That's fine too. Moving forward, I see that we have a fifth between our bass and the alto, G to D. We also have an octave between the tenor and the soprano, but guess what? Each of these voices, the lower voices, are static, so those are fine. You can't have an error when the voices aren't changing. Okay, oblique motion is really, really good. Which takes us to the next one here. We have a perfect fifth between the bass and the alto. We also have a perfect octave between the bass and soprano here. Okay, perfect octave. It does go to a perfect fifth between the bass and soprano, like this. But again, it's changing from perfect fifth to perfect octave, so we are fine. They're not consecutive octaves, they're not consecutive fifths. So that's not a problem. Okay, and if we compare our bass and alto voices, it goes to D and F sharp. Well, D and F sharp is a third. That's fine. Okay, lastly, we've got to check this out here. We have a perfect fifth between our bass and tenor here. I didn't need to check this one out because three of our voices were oblique. I mean, are static, which means you only have one voice moving, and you can't have any voice leading errors there other than spacing and voicing or spelling. And then we also have here D to A between the bass and soprano. That's also a perfect fifth. And we also have a perfect octave between the alto and soprano. So we have to look out for these, okay? So these are three intervals we have to check. So now we look at the next chord, bass and tenor. Goes to G and D. Well, G and D is also a perfect fifth, so guess what? That means we have contrary fifths right here, okay, between the bass and the tenor. So that's a no-no. All right, so we've located that. Now let's check our bass and soprano. Okay, they're moving in contrary motion. G to B, well, that's a third, so that's fine. And lastly, let's check our tenor and soprano. That's an octave, and it moves to a D and a B, which is a sixth, which is fine. Okay. So I know I moved kind of quickly there. If you need to watch that video in slow motion, you can. But that is a breakdown of an analysis of that example there. And let's very quickly look at this next one here, which is error detection, which includes construction rules or errors. So we're looking to see if there's missing notes, improper spacing or improper doubling, and then our motion errors, parallels, direct improper tendency, tone resolution. Okay, so all right, so let's take a look at this here. So in this example, it's a little bit more detailed, right? Because Now we're going to be looking to see, are they spelled right, and all this kind of stuff, which means we're going to have to analyze our chords a little bit. I'll show you how we do that. If we look at the spelling here, we have a G, 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 B flat. All right, this is fine. We're missing a fifth, though. The fifth is missing, but we really don't need the fifth. Let's take a look at the next one here. C, G, E flat, C. Okay, fine. Let's look here. And I'm just going through, I'm just checking to see if what parts of the chords are present. Next we have an F, a C, an A, and an F. Good. Next we have a B flat. I'll do it down here. A D, another B flat. So we're missing the fifth. Not a problem. We don't have to have the fifth. Okay. Next we're looking at this, A, C sharp, E, another A. That's fine. Let's look here. We have a D, an A, and an F. That's fine. Next we have a G, a D, and a B flat. That's fine. And lastly we have a D, F sharp, and an A. Now here's one issue here. We've doubled the F sharp. Now, why is this an issue? You want to watch out for doubling your leading tone. Okay, why? Because the leading tone is the raised 7th scale degree. It has a very strong tendency to resolve up a half step to tonic. That means if you double your leading tone, it means that the voices are both going to want to resolve up a half step, which means you'll have parallel unisons or parallel octaves. That's a problem. You lose independence of voices, okay? Now, how do I know this is a leading tone? Well, I have two flats here, which tells me I'm either in the key of B flat major or G minor. Because I have the F sharp is the leading tone in G minor, so I can be pretty sure that this is the leading tone, you see? So here this is an issue because we have doubled leading tone. I'll just write it out, leading tone. Okay, so we've already identified one error here. Okay. Now, let's look at the next thing. So missing notes, we're not really dealing with any bad missing notes. If you're missing a third, that would certainly be a problem. But we're not missing thirds in any of these cases. We're simply missing, the fifth in two of these instances. And as I explained, missing the fifth is not really a deal breaker. But we want to look at spacing now, spacing errors. We're looking to see if there's any voice crossings or if the distance between soprano and alto and tenor ever exceed an octave. Okay, so let's take a look at that. I'll mark these in blue. First example here, and also we want to look at registration. Is the soprano too high, too low? Same with the alto, same with the tenor, same with the bass. Okay, soprano and alto look good. All right, here's kind of a situation that I don't love. There's an octave between the alto and the tenor here. Technically, that doesn't break our rule. It doesn't exceed an octave. But that's the limit, and I would recommend avoiding this. It doesn't tend to sound very good. Okay? It will sound a little bit empty, a little bit too spaced. But again, it doesn't break any rules, so I'm not going to call it a mistake here. Just understand that's the very limit of where you want to go typically. Let's take a look at the next example here. Soprano, alto, tenor, all fine. Each of those are within an octave. In the next example here, you can see that the soprano alto moved to the same B flat. There's a decent amount of distance, but it's still a minor sixth, perfectly acceptable. It's not going to be a problem. Let's look at the next one here. Again, you're kind of getting to the limit between the alto and the tenor, reaching that octave. And again, I would caution you to try to avoid this. A better way to write this is to maybe bring the tenor up a little higher or something. Or even to start the tenor higher, right? So for example, you might have started the tenor at the E, maybe move the alto to the A, and then you would have a simpler solution here. The E could then resolve down to D, for example. And then you'd have a much more balanced sound. I'll show you the difference in sound. So here's the written example. Okay. Versus what I'm suggesting there is another issue here I'll point out in just right now. And that is we have the leading tone here. This is D minor. Could be F major or D minor. Leading tone. Leading tone, what did we say about leading tones? They want to resolve. This should be resolving to D. So that's our improper leading tone resolution. Okay, so that's a problem. And lastly, again, we're really stretching that distance between the alto and tenor going to the octave. Again, that's the absolute limit, and I would caution against it. In fact, some theory textbooks will call that kind of an error, having too much spacing between those two voices. And that, of course, simply leaves our motion errors to find. Okay, and we'll find those motion errors the same way we did to our previous example. Okay, so I'm just going to run through here instead of going through the whole example one by one. I'm just going to knock them out and show you another way of thinking of this. So I'm going to look intervals. Third, that's fine. Third is fine. In fact, I'll use my laser pointing third. Okay, then I'm going to soprano to tenor. That's a third. That's fine. That's a third. That's fine. This is a triple tonic, by the way. So in triple tonic, that's a lot of tonics there. You know, I think this would have made a lot more sense by moving the alto to a D, for example. All right, so now that's all fine, but we do have octaves here and here because they're all G's, right? So we do need to watch out for that. So I'm going to look between those voices. Octave to a fifth, that's not a problem. Octave to a third, not a problem. And this is oblique motion with the tenor voice, so anything with the tenor voice is going to be fine. So here, other than those errors we talked about in the triple root of the first chord, we're actually okay with our writing. Let's go to the next one here, because we're just looking at motion errors now. Okay, so motions, I'm looking here. I know I've got a perfect fifth here that I'm going to look out for. I know that I also have a perfect octave here I need to look for. Okay, now if I check these two motions, fifth to a third, that's fine. But if I check my soprano to bass, it goes to an octave. So that's a problem, right? So this would be contrary octaves, octaves by contrary motion. So there's that error right there for us. Okay, let's go on to the next example here. Okay, and all I'm looking for is perfect fifths and perfect octaves. That's all I'm doing. So I'll see this is a sixth, that's fine. I'll say this is a third, that's fine. This is a third, that's fine. See what I'm doing? Okay, E to A, ooh, there's a fifth, so I'm going to keep that marked. And we have A to A, that's an octave. And also A to E is a fifth as well. So we have three to check on the next one. So I check my bass and tenor. They go from octave to a fifth. That's fine. Then I'm going to check my bass to alto. They both move up by a fourth. D to A, well, guess what? That is parallel fifths. That's the problem. I'll mark that. And lastly, I'll see that my tenor is static, so the motion between it and the alto is perfectly fine. Okay, which leaves us one more. So you can see how this is maybe a little bit faster to run through, and just knowing that you've got some things that you have to look out for. There's something else for us to look out for here. The bass and the soprano are moving by similar motion, right? Similar motion. They're actually moving in parallel motion. But it's D to F, which is a third, so that's not a problem. That's just looking out for the potential direct fifth or direct octave. Okay, anytime you have that leap in similar motion. And lastly, we're taking a look at this example here. That's a sixth, that's fine. This is a third, that's fine. Okay, and a third, that's fine. However, we do have a fifth here and a fifth here and an octave here. So we got to check those guys out. Bass to tenor, go to a third, so that's fine. Okay, bass to alto, okay, goes to a D to an F sharp. D to F sharp is also a third. That's fine. And then lastly, taking a look here, this fifth goes to F sharp, which is an octave. It changes from a fifth to an octave. That's fine. Of course, we do know that there's an issue here with the doubling of the leading tone, and also the distance really pushing the limits there is not preferable. Okay, hope this video was helpful. I know that was a little bit long of a video, but I wanted to make sure to walk you through each of the steps so that you're clear on how to do the analysis in an actual example. If you have any questions, let me know, and I'll see you in the next video.